The problem with ChatGPT and other LLMs is that they have a cutoff date as to the information that they know. So here I've got GPT 3.5. I'm just going to ask a question that I know is past the cutoff date. So when does season 20 of Grey's Anatomy air? And here you can say, as of the last update, they don't know anything. So I'm going to take the same question and go to our app that we're going to create here. Here, I've uploaded this PDF, which is basically the Wikipedia page for Grey's Anatomy. If I put the same question in here, it's augmented with this additional information. It knows season 20 premiered March 14th, 2024. And that is why RAG apps are great. And they're leveraging the same language model as ChatGPT. In this case, it's ChatGPT. But it's got this additional information to make it more relevant. So today we're going to talk about RAG. What is RAG? That is the question. So let's talk about LLMs. LLMs are large language models. For example, what ChatGPT uses, the GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 models, those are LLMs. So these LLMs are trained on data, but you only have data up to that cutoff point. So what a RAG app is the process of bringing in additional information that these models may not have, whether that's more recent data or private data. This is called Retrieval Augmented Generation, aka RAG. So the RAG process, the process of building a RAG app takes 6 steps. So step 1, load. Step 2, split. Step 3, embed. Step 4, store. Step 5, retrieve. And step 6, generate. So we're going to go through each of these 6 steps, then we're going to hop into some code and build our own RAG app. So step 1, loading. Loading is loading our data. So in example for our application, it's going to be PDF. So what that looked like is we have a PDF file, and then we're just going to load that as data into our application. So we're going to hop into some code now. We're going to set it up so we can load in a PDF file and then load that in. All right, so we're going to hop into coding. So here I have a new folder opened here in VS Code, and I'm just going to start by, first I'm going to start by creating a virtual environment. So I'm going to go here and create a new terminal. And here in the terminal, I'm going to say pip3 install virtual env. Once that's all set up, I'll set up my environment. So I'm going to do that by doing python 3-m vnv, and then I'm just going to name my environment vnv. And then I'm going to just activate the environment on the Mac. It is source, the environment name, mine is vnv, then /bin/activate. And you can see here that the virtual environment is going to be set up. And you can see here also that the folder has been added. So the next step is to start installing all the libraries you need for the project. So I'm going to do that by creating a file called requirements.txt. And in this document, I'll just add a bunch of libraries I know I'm going to need. So I'm going to do langchain community, langchain openai. That's what the LLM we're going to be using. Phase CPU, which we're going to use for embedding. We'll talk about that as we move along. PyPDF for allowing us to deal with the PDF files. Python.env, so we can do .env files. We'll get into that in a second as well. And then Streamlit we're going to use to create the UIs. So that is all the libraries we're going to need today. Clear the terminal so I could just get to the top here And in order to install these files, I'm going to use a terminal again. So I'm going to go pip3 install -r and then requirements.txt, the file that we want to install. So that will install all the dependencies there. And I'll come back when that's done. All right, so now that we have all those dependencies installed, we're just going to get started by setting up our web app so that we can accept the PDF file that we want to chat with. So I'm creating a new file called app.py, and here we are going to import Streamlit, which we're going to use for setting up the web app UI. So import Streamlit as st. And then I'm just going to create a function here. I'm just going to call the function main, and just put pass here. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to do my typical if name underscore underscore equals underscore underscore main underscore underscore. Then we're going to run our function. So this way we just know that when we run our program, it's just going to run the function that we want. So to set up this function initially, what we're going to do is we are going to I'm going to do st.title to name our app. I'm just going to call it PDF chat. And then we're going to just add the ability to add the PDF in a sidebar. So here we're going to go with st.sidebar. And then we're going to upload the file. So there's a function called file uploader. File uploader like this that Streamlit has that we're going to use. And here we're just going to say what the label is going to be. So I'm just going to say upload file. And then we are going to just say the type of file that we want to handle here. It's going to be an array. And for today, we just want PDFs. So that should at least allow us to upload a PDF. So I'm going to save that. And in order to run this, we're going to go Streamlit run app.py, which is the name of our file. Here it's going to open up, and you can see we have our PDF chat and the ability to upload a file. So now we are going to talk about the load part of the RAG app. So going back here to our web app. Here, I just want to show you that we can upload a PDF. So here I've got a PDF. This is basically the Wikipedia page for Grey's Anatomy, and I can just drag this here, and we've got the text. So this is what the upload file functionality is doing, and what we need to do is be able to grab the text from this PDF and load it as our data. So what we're going to do here is back here in our code editor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. This file I'm going to call llmhelper.py. And this is where we'll do all of our functions that have to do with the LLM. So here, what I'm going to do is to handle PDFs, we're going to take our PyPDF import. So we're going to bring that in, and we're going to import PDF reader. And here, I'm going to create a new function called process PDF. And this is what we're going to bring into our app once we're done. So starting off, this is the load data part of our RAG file. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an object for PDF reader that we just imported like that. And then this is where we're going to store the text. We're going to load the text into this variable text. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create a for loop here. So for each page in pdfreader.pages, we're just going to append the text. So text plus equals page dot extract text. And then we're just going to return the text. So for now, this is what our function is going to return. So going back to our app.py file, what we're going to do is we are just going to import that new function that we just wrote. So we'll do that by going up here and just say from LLM, it's got to spell from, right? From LLM helper, which is that file that we just created. We are going to import our function, which is process PDF, right? And what we want to do is trigger the function. So in order to trigger the function, what I'm going to do is first, this file upload, we just want to be able to access this file. So first I'm going to make this a variable. So I'm just going to call it my PDF. So that file that we upload is going to be a variable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a button to allow this, us to know we've got a file, we want to process it. So we're going to use the st.button option here. We're just going to call it submit. And I'm going to make the type primary because I like the coloring there. So now that we've got our PDF and our submit button, what we're going to do is once that submit button is hit, we want to trigger the function that we just created. So we're going to just say if submit, we want our result to be, we are going to run our new function, which is going to take my PDF, right? So what I forgot to do here is say this function needs to accept a variable here of PDF. So now we're gonna send our PDF in there, and what we expect, I'm just gonna write this temporarily to the screen. We would expect to see the text that we just loaded. So if we go back to our app here, I'm gonna push R, which should refresh it. Okay, so let me just go back here. A couple of mistakes I made. First, here in the PDF reader needs to also know what PDF. So this variable we're passing in, we're passing to the PDF reader. The second, I made a mistake with the way that we imported it. You have to be careful with the cases, so it has to be PDF reader like this. And let me correct it here as well. So now this function should be accurate, right? We've imported the right method here, and we're using the PDF variable. So let's go ahead and save that, go back to our app, refresh, and now it appears to be working. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to our Grey's Anatomy file, bring it in, click submit. You can see that it's running. And here's the text that it's imported. So that is working well. The load is working. All right, so the second step is splitting. Splitting is breaking up that data we just loaded in into smaller chunks. So what that looks like is we have our data, what we just loaded in, and then we're going to split that into chunks. So depending on how much data, will determine how many chunks we have. We'll get into that, but in this image, this is what this looks like. Our data is split up. So let's hop to the code and split. I'm gonna hop back into our LLM helper, and we're just gonna update our existing function. We're gonna update this existing process PDF function in order to split that text we just generated into chunks. So first we're going to start by we need to import a text splitter from langchain. So we're going to do that by doing from langchain text splitters. We're going to import character text splitters. Character text splitter. All right, so we're going to remove this return because we're not going to return the text anymore. And so I'm just going to add another flag here that we're going to split the text. So in order to do that, we are going to create a new variable that is going to be our text splitter, which is going to be an instance of the character text splitter. And in here, we have a couple of things that we need to include. First, we need a separator. I need to make sure I spell this right because I never do. I think that's how you spell separator. And then that's just going to be a new line. So our separator is going to be a new line. Then we want our chunk size. So how big of a chunk do we want to make them? So our chunk size is going to be 1,000. So every 1,000 characters, we're going to split into a new chunk. Chunk overlap. Chunk overlap is just going to be like if we do 1,000, starting at 800, we're going to do our new chunk. So our chunk overlap is going to be 200. So there's going to be an overlap of 200 characters for each chunk. The length function. We just need to include the length function here just so they know how long the text is. And in Python, it's just len. And is separator regex is just going to be false. Separator. We are not using regex there. So if I spelled everything right, that should be our text splitter. And then next we have our chunks. So for our chunks, we're just going to use our text splitter and the split text function method here. And then we're going to import our text. So text was what we generated when we did this load part. So the text is going to go in here. And for now, we're going to return the chunks. So that is setting up our function here to split the text. So no change in the app.py. We still want to see what the result of our function does. So heading back to our app, if I push R, it'll reload our application with the new function. And I'm going to go ahead and resubmit that. And now you can see our chunks. So this is the first chunk, this is the second chunk. So we've got 4 different chunks here for what text that was in our file. So that is working. All right, so we'll move on to the next step. The third step is embedding. What embedding is creating a vector representation of a piece of text. So taking what that looks like, we have our chunks that we've just split our data into, and we're going to create vectors. So what vectors are what makes it easy for the computer to understand what the text is, and they look something like this, numerical representations of our data. So right now we're going to hop into the code, and we're going to embed our chunks of data into vectors. All right, so the next step in creation of a RAG file, we've got embed. So for embedding, we want to use openai. So in order to use openai, we want to set up our .env file with our openai API. So in order to do that, I am going to go into the LLM helper. And I'm going to say from .env import load.env. And then I'm just going to trigger that function right here, load.env. And in order to do that, we also need to create a new file. So we're going to create a new file .env, and this is where we're going to create our variable to store our OpenAI API key. So it's going to be OpenAI API key equals, and then here is where you're going to post your OpenAI key. It's going to be like sk dash blah 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 blah. All right, so now I've included my API key in my .env file. I also want to create a get ignore. So if you're going to be uploading your projects to GitHub, you just want to add .env to your git ignore so that file isn't uploaded and people can't see your API key. So next, now that we've done that, we can start embedding. So in order to start embedding here, we also need to import another item from langchain. So from langchain openai, we need to import openai embeddings. Openai embeddings. And so we're going to remove this return. We're going to return the embeddings now. So in order to embed, what we're going to do is we're going to first create an embedding. So let's just call it embedding. And that's going to be the openai embeddings method we just imported. And we're going to say embeddings.embed document. Embed documents here, and that's just going to take our chunks and embed them. And we're going to return embeddings. So that should be our new function. Again, no updates here. When we write it to the screen, it should be embeddings now. So let's just refresh that and resubmit. And now you can see in green here is what the embeddings look like. So that's working. Step 4 is storage. So a vector store takes care of storing this as embedded data that we just created and allows us to search on these vectors. So one thing about vectors is that the way that they are stored, related data is stored closer together. So if you want to get data, the vectors that are closer together are more related. So what this looks like is we have our vectors that we've created, and we're just going to create a database basically with these vectors that the computer or the LLM can use to retrieve data. So let's hop into the code and create our vector store. We're on our next step, which is storing. So to store, what we need to do in our LLM helper is now we're going to import a vector store. So from langchain.vectorstores, import phase. That's the vector store we're going to be using today. And down in our function, all right, we're going to remove this and add a new one. So now we're going to be moving into storing. So we're just going to say store here. And here we're going to call our vector store DB for database. And it's just going to be phase dot from texts. And it's going to take as an input the chunks that we just created, and then it's also going to take the embeddings. And that's it. So in this case, we want to return the DB. Save that. We can go back to our Red app, refresh. Okay, error here. All right, so we've corrected the import here from langchain community vector stores for import phase, and then here you've got our DB. So let's see if this works again. We've refreshed this. I think I need to bring the file back in. So now we've got our file. We're going to submit it. It's running. And we've got our vector store. So that is working as expected. And so we can move on to our next step. Right, moving on to the 5th step, retrieval. So retrieval is when we have a user input, we want to get these relevant splits from our vector store using a retriever. So what that looks like is that we have a query from our user, and then we search our database to find the vectors that are relevant to that query, and then we respond back with that vector. So now we're going to get into the code, and we're going to set up our retriever. We need a couple of imports to support retrieving. So first, from langchain openai, we already imported the embeddings, and now we're going to import an LLM, which is going to be chat openai. That's the LLM we're going to use. Next, we need to import some memory. So from langchain.memory, we are going to import conversation buffer memory. And then we also need to import a chain. So from langchain.chains, we're going to import conversational retriever chain. Retrieval chain. All right, so that should be all the imports that we need for this. So going back to our function, we're gonna just do the retrieve step. And the first step here, we're gonna import our LLM that we just imported. So chat openai. So that's our LLM. Then we're gonna set up our retriever. So we're gonna call our retriever. And that is going to be coming from our database, our vector store database we just set up. And then we're just going to make that as retriever using that method there. And then we need some memory so that it remembers what has retrieved in the midst of the conversation. So that's going to be conversation buffer memory. And that has some inputs here. So here we need a memory key that we can refer back to. And we're just going to call this memory key chat history. And next we need return messages equals true. So this way we can have a chat with memory. And then next, we are going to set up our conversation chain. So we're just going to call this conversation. And it's going to take the conversation retrieval train that we imported here. And this is where we're going to say our LLM is going to be our chat openai LLM up here. Then our memory is going to be our memory that we set up here. Our retriever is going to be the retriever that we set up here, and verbose equals true, just so we can sort of see what the program's thinking about. So here we're going to return conversation. So that is our function there. That should be all set up. We do need to make some updates to our app.py in order to make this work. So first I'm going to rename this variable to be a little bit more accurate. So this is really just the chat that we're setting up here. So I'm going to rename it like that. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to set up session state. So session state allows us to access this variable even in Streamlit when the page reloads and things like that. It's going to all the variables are going to restart. So this just keeps our chat so we can keep the memory as we continue to click buttons and chat. So in order to do that, we're going to update this variable. So it's got st.sessionState.chat. So that's going to be our variable. We're not going to write this to the screen anymore. And in order to keep session state, we have to initialize this at the beginning of our program. So I'm just going to put it right here, right after the title. I'm just going to set session state here. And so what you can just say, if chat not in st.sessionState, then st.sessionState .chat, which is that variable we just set up, equals none. So at the beginning, it's going to check, is there a chat in session state? If it's not, it's going to be none. Once we set it, it's going to be this variable that we've got. And then since we don't want to put that to the screen, what we're going to do is we just want to know when once we click the submit button, we just want to know, yes, it's processed and the chat is set up and ready. So here I'm going to use an info box here, and I'm just going to say processed. That way we know the function has run successfully and it's complete. So if we go back to our app here and refresh, our file's still here. We're going to click the button. Uh-oh. All right, we're back. So I figured out what the issue was before. So if we go back to our LLM helper, I had made a typo in here. So in our conversational retrieval train, we need to use the from LLM method here on the conversational retrieval chain. So now if we go back to our app, the app is refreshed with that. So I'm gonna take our PDF, put that in, click submit. Here it's running. And processed. So that is working as expected. So now what we have to do is move on to the next step, the last step of creating a RAG app, which is generation. All right, the sixth step is generation. So this is the last step. We're going to generate a response. So our LLM model is going to take our user input and going to retrieve the relevant data and generate a response. So what this looks like is we have the user query, then we're going to take that, and also we've already used a retriever to retrieve the relevant data, and then we're going to use our LLM model, which is trained to respond with natural language, and we are going to respond back. So now we're going to hop in, finish up our code, and finish up our chat app that allows us to chat with our PDF document. So in order to do this, we're going to stay in our app.py file. And what we're going to do is we're going to generate our chat. So to do this, what we're going to do is we are going to create an area where the user can enter a query. So moving here outside of the sidebar, we're just going to set up a new variable called user query. And we're going to set that equal to st.chatInput. So this is going to allow this to set up a chat using Streamlit. And for the chat input, we just want to say, enter your query. So if we go back to our app, refresh it, you can see now we've got a chat input. So next, what we want to do is create a function to generate our chat responses. So what I'm going to do is above this main function, I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call it generate response. And it's going to take an input of the user query that we just created, or query. So the response that we have is going to be, it's going to take our chat variable that we created, so st.sessionState .chat. So that's that variable that we had created earlier. And in the chat, we're just going to say that our question is the user query, which is going to be the input there. And then next, we are going to take a look at our chat history. So we are going to create a new variable called chat history, which also we want to be able to remember. So we're going to use session state and chat history equals response. And so from our response, we want to take the chat history. And this is coming back to that when we went to our memory, remember we had a memory key, so it's calling back there. Now, if we want to keep this chat history in session state, we've got to initialize that. So going back here in session state, I'm just going to copy this in our main file. We're just going to check here. So if chat history is not in session state, then chat history equals none. So that way it's just initialized there. And then next, to generate the output on the screen of the chat, what we're going to do is we're just going to do a loop. So for I an element in enumerate st dot session state dot chat history. So this is going to output all the responses. So we're going to just iterate through that, and then basically if it's an even number, so that's where we're going to do I module 2 to check if it's an even number. If it's then we are going to, that means it's the user response. So we're going to say st.chat message user. So that just is going to make it look like the users in the chat. So we're going to write that to the screen. We're going to write whatever that is to the content of that message to the screen. And then the opposite, so we're going to say else, it's going to be the assistant or the AI chat. So I'm just going to copy that there and change this to assistant. And we're going to write that to the screen. So that should set up our chat to generate the chat response. And then if we go back down to here, we added the user query. Basically, once we have a user query, we're going to check if that exists. And once it does, we are going to trigger that function we just wrote, the generate response. And then the input is going to be our user query. So that should work. If we go back here, I'm just going to refresh the whole thing. And I'm just going to import our file one more time. So Grey's Anatomy, submit. Here it's running. Processed means that the file's in there. We're ready to chat. So here I'm just gonna say, who is Meredith Grey? And so that is the user. This is the assistant responding. And you can see here back in the chat, because in our LLM helper we said verbose is true, you can see sort of how it's thinking. So it's thinking about all these things that from the file and generating a response. So just to show that it has memory, I'm just going to say, who is her best friend? And now it knows that we're talking about Meredith Grey, and her best friend is Christina Yang. So there we've got our PDF chat app. It's working, it's got memory. All right, thanks for watching. If you like this video, you might like this one up here. Like and subscribe, and leave a comment below if you have any feedback for me. Thanks.